Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our conference entitled Empower Athletes Protect Their Rights. It's a conference linked to the project HERO, funded by the Erasmus Plus Sports Program. And today, together, during approximately 2 hours, we will explore how to strengthen athletes' rights and voices. We will discuss key issues such as governance, gender equality, environmental activism, and human rights in sports. So we are very honored to have with us 6 experts who will share their insights and experiences. So first of all, we have Silvija Mitevska. So Silvija is the founder and executive director of Sports Social Solutions. She will introduce the HERO project, which focuses on empowering athletes by protecting their rights and promoting their voices. We have also Marie-Cécile Naves. So Marie-Cécile is a political scientist and sociologist. She is senior research fellow at Heerdt, and she is the head of the Gender and Geopolitics Observatory. She specializes in gender equality in sports. We have also Carole Gomez. So Carole is graduate assistant in sports sociology at the Institute of Sports Science at the University of Lausanne, the UNIL. She studies sports governance and international relations, and she is writing a PhD about the concept of safeguarding. We have also Pim Verschuuren. So Pim is a lecturer at STAPS University of Rennes 2, and he focuses on sports integrity and environmental issues. And Pim analyzes how athletes' activism, especially on ecological matters, can be seen as a form of whistleblowing. We have also Daniela Heerdt, Dr. Daniela Heerdt. So she is a researcher and consultant on sport and human rights. She investigates on how international law protect athletes and how sports institutions can be held responsible for rights violations. And last but not least, we have also Charlotte Feraille. So Charlotte is the general delegate of the French Sports Foundation. She works on promoting transparency and human rights in sports governance, and she's focusing on digital strategies and communication. So the conference, you will see, gonna be divided in 2 parts. So the first one gonna be an introduction to the HERO project by Silvija Mitevska, and the second one gonna be a discussion session with our panel of speakers. So thank you again to watch this video. I hope you will enjoy it.
Thank you, Lukas, for the kind invitation to participate and to present the HERO project. And thank you for all the panelists and everyone attending this webinar and conference on such a relevant topic. So I'll start by sharing my presentation. In the next more or less 7 to 10 minutes, I will be guiding you through the HERO project, what it is about, what we are trying to achieve, and what are the main outcomes that everyone can benefit from this project. So HERO, the Human Rights Empowered Through Rights project, Rights of Athletes project, has started in October 2024 and has the life cycle of 2 years. So we are approaching the end of the project. The general objective of this project is to respect, protect, and promote athletes' human rights in sport by supporting sport governing bodies in developing appropriate and effective strategies and mechanisms on how to prevent athletes' human rights violations on one hand, but also on how to respond to the cases of abuse on the other hand. So this is the main general objective, under which we have 5 specific objectives. The first one is to contribute to the scientific literature in regard to human rights violation in sport and sports organizations. The second one is how to improve sports institutions' knowledge and capacity to respond to reports and allegations of sport-related cases of abuse. Then the third specific objective is to implement on-site workshops for human rights and sport education, especially targeting athletes, coaches, and leadership of sport governing bodies. The fourth specific objective is to create and define a protocol for athlete human rights protection by promoting prevention and remedy of abuse. And the fifth and the final one is to raise awareness and to sustain this relevant topic of athletes' human rights in sport and how it will contribute and have a positive impact and benefit in general for the whole sports ecosystem. The main project activities that I would like to shortly touch upon during this presentation are the following one. The first one is the research. We have done an extensive research aiming to contribute to the literature on human rights violation in sport. In this research, there is the categorization of athletes' human rights, and they're categorized in 7 categories or pillars. Based on this research, we have then created educational materials. The first one is the online educational program that is already available online, and the protocol for athletes' human rights protection that is it's being created right now, and it will be done in due time as well, and it will be offered to all sports governing bodies for consultation. And the third activity is to raise awareness. We need to be more vocal, to be more outspoken about this relevant topic among sports people and sports organizations, how they can recognize, how they can be more educated and empowered to claim their athletes' human rights, and also sports governing bodies how to develop further sports policies through the framework of human-centered approach and principles. Very shortly about the consortium. Since it is co-founded by the European Union, we have very diverse, we have managed to have a diverse consortium. The coordinator is the French Institute for International Strategic Affairs, and the partners are coming for 3 different countries: Sports Social Solutions, ASEAN Institute, European Network for Innovation and Knowledge, the Olympic Committee of North Macedonia, and Sports Innovation Hub. What we were trying or believing to aim through this project is on 3 different levels: the short and the mid and the long term level. By short term, we believe that we will engage athletes in an online training course that is designed to deepen their understanding of human rights and empower them to advocate for positive change. The midterm would be to engage sport governing bodies on how to adopt human rights-based sports policies, and long term is how together in a joint effort we could build a strong ecosystem with robust mechanisms to protect and uphold athletes' human rights. And the target groups and beneficiaries are first the athletes, both at grassroots and elite levels, that will be directly benefiting from the project outcomes. Then the sport governing bodies and managers that are also benefiting from the project engagement and participation. And in general, it is about the whole entire sports ecosystem, which will indirectly benefit from the project outcomes, from the awareness raising activities that we'll have, and the action, and for the joint action for athletes' rights protection. What I would really like to highlight at this point is the online educational program named the Foundation of Protecting Athletes' Human Rights that has been developed and that is available online already. It has been developed on a previous extensive research on athletes' human rights, as I mentioned before, and it is designed to help various actors within sport organizations and especially athletes themselves to better understand their rights. And basically this online program takes you and answers the questions of what are human rights of athletes in sports, so provides more basic information on this topic. Then how can athletes claim their human rights, and how can sport organizations respect athletes' human rights within their scope of work. At the end of this course, the participants will be able to explain with concrete examples what human rights of athletes are and where they come from, identify mechanisms on how we can help athletes to claim their human rights, and also understand the responsibility of sports organizations to respect athletes' human rights and what steps they can take to better protect and respect athletes' human rights within their scope of work. This online course, the length is approximately 5 hours, has been developed by the instructors Antoine Duval and Daniela Heerdt, both from Aster Institute, and it's available and it is free of charge at our online platform. The protocol, as I mentioned before, it's something that is pending and it will be finalized in the next week. That one will also be available online, and I believe that you will be talking maybe more about the protocol during the panel discussion. But for all the information I have provided, and for deeper information and for the links, you can visit the website and the LinkedIn page of the HERO project, and there you can find more resources. And I do hope that we will have many sport governing bodies and athletes that will be visiting and going through the course, because I believe that this course is a great step towards raising awareness among athletes themselves, but also the sport governing bodies where the power lies and how we can all contribute to positive social change in this regard. Thank you once again, and I do hope that we will have a productive panel discussion after this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia, for the kind presentation. So we will now move to the second part of our session, conference. So it's going to be a discussion which will be divided in 3 parts. The first part will be much more about governance, power, and inequalities in sports. The second one will be about violence, abuse, and athletes' protection. And finally, the third one going to be much more about transparency, ethics, and responsibility. So, of course, we prepared together this conference, so we prepared the questions, some answer, and so on, but feel free, dear panelists, to take the floor if you want to add something during the conference. Thank you very much. So, we'll first discuss together how sports governance structures influence equality and human rights. And I will ask you, dear Marie-Cécile, to start. You have this hard work to start the discussion and to try to answer to this question, how the way power is organized within international sports institutions maintain inequalities and discrimination, especially regarding gender.
Thank you, Lukas. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I think it's okay.
Yeah.
I find it very interesting to start the conference by thinking about power, because power is an obsession for policymaking and political scientists, so I feel very much concerned about it. And what are we talking when we discuss about discrimination and inequality? I mean, what areas do we at first sight think of? First, governance, of course, both quantitatively, through gender parity, for instance, and qualitatively, that is, equality of decision-making power. But also, second, the fight against sexual and sexist violence, that is, anti-predatory behaviors, and not only against women. Not to forget a third one, which is equal treatment of men and women, notably in refusing to define what is good masculinity and good femininity, and in putting an end to the following prejudice: when men overperform, it is male exceptionalism, but when women overperform, they are suspected of cheating, for example, in not being real women. And of course, a fourth one, which is not an exhaustive list, of course, that is mediatization. It means the right to share public space as well as resources. Yet it happens that these ideas, which until now seemed to be following a dynamic, I will not say that they were consensual, of course not, but they have been real in terms of reputation of institutions and responses to social and sometimes economic demand. These ideas are under attack all over the world, including in democracies. They are not only criticized, they are facing violent attacks. I think we have to tell it like it is. Powerful political and economic systems want to humiliate women and minorities, to silence them, to make them invisible, in short, to put them back in their place, which is certainly not the public sphere. This is a turning point, this is a geopolitical turning point, and do we have the power to resist? Do sports institutions have this power? I think they do. We are living at a moment when the fight against inequality and discrimination is going to become very, very, very difficult, and will put the world of sport to the test. Will the much vaunted values of sport, implode and therefore lose all credibility for a long time to come, or not? Let's be clear, I would like to insist again on this. We have to put it this way. And so, Lukas, to answer your question, the governance of international sport, through the influence it has been building for decades, is now asked to be a place of resistance. Sports institutions have to show and implement a real will to say no. Equality cannot be decreed, but it has to be said. The narrative is key, so it's important to say things again and again. A number of upcoming major sporting events, Los Angeles 2028, Men's Soccer World Cup of 2026, will be put to the test. On April 9, the International Olympic Committee announced that the next Olympics, in 3 years' time, would feature more mixed gender events and more parity in individual events. And I would add that the advocating discrimination under such fallacious pretext as women are in positions of responsibility just because of quotas, because they are not competent, or men have been bypassed, they have faced line cutters, women, black people, and so on. And men are the real discriminated against, meaning men as a whole. This is the first gateway to the destruction of democratic values and institutions, and more globally, of respect, solidarity, and peace, that is, founding values of modern sport. So sports organizations have the choice to be, or not, complicit in the global movement of predation that we are facing today. The governance of international sport has improved unevenly from one federation to another. The IOC has made huge progress in the distribution of management positions, thanks to a proactive policy and the lobbying of feminist organizations. Elsewhere, however, there have been a great deal of stagnation due to a scourge that is particularly prevalent in the world of sport, endogamy. For example, of the 206 national Olympic committees, if my figures are correct, only 24 are headed by women, that is less than 12%, while FIFA has less than 13% women. The lack of renewal of this elite and the refusal to lose one's privileges explain it. This must change. Change responds at the same time to an ethical imperative, to efficiency objectives, and to goals of broader and economic and social progress. The diversification of governance bodies sends out clear messages to the sporting world and to society as a whole. First, it's possible. Second, it works better this way. And third, by doing the same, you make sports ambitions a reality. It's the best that wins. And I would like to say it again, gender equality in top management doesn't trickle down on its own. I say it often, so let me say it again today. Gender equality in top management doesn't trickle down on its own, but it does help on a small scale to make sport a tool for change and a way to accelerate change. Human rights, well-being and health at work, respect for integrity, making sports organizations safe places to work or volunteer, and making sports practice a safe and non-violent place for athletes, precisely because the body is at stake. These are key points when you talk about the fight against discrimination. It's not only governance, it's a safe place to have this governance. It means promoting a welcoming environment for all those involved in high-level competitions, in line with the principles enshrined in the Olympic Charter. This is inseparable from parity. Sport is no more accountable for health and well-being than in other social spheres, but neither it is any less so. And since it extols principles of respect and solidarity, it must set an example. So the definition of power is implicit in your question, and I think that the power of sport is a power of doing and not a power over. In this sense, it is mainly feminist, as it is based on trust, respect, and collegiality. There are systemic gender discrimination that sport, nonetheless, is the last to tolerate, notably media and financial sharing. Most people still find it normal for women's sport to stay in the margin and men's sport to be the universal. In fact, we say sport, female sport. And when you denounce it, you face violent insults. But it is a matter of money. All countries and territories have less invested in women's sport from childhood. So this is an institutional discrimination that we have to fight against over and over. Maybe I will stop here and continue the discussion afterwards. But I would like to. I would have liked to say more things, of course. But my main point was to talk about the definition of power and what it means in a broad sense.
Thank you very much. Actually, thank you very much for this powerful introduction. And now I turn myself to Charles Feraille to keep going this discussion. I would like to ask you, how do sports federations, as global actors with significant autonomy, influence sports rules worldwide, and how does the lack of external control change their legitimacy regarding human rights?
So first of all, I want to say you that there is a relative autonomy of sport organization and lex sportiva, that is law and rules of sport. We can consider that there is a sort of mondial order of sports which produce laws and regulation organization, which organize justice, and which influence by exercise of soft power based especially on image of athletes. So there is a great interdependence of athletes and organizations, because athletes produce values for these organizations. Sport organizations produce laws, regulation, cases laws, and organize sport justice. In theory, hierarchy of standards obliges sports organization to comply to national law, include constitution, and supranational law, as a Human Rights European Convention or a Universal Human Rights Declaration. But in fact, firstly, we can say the more states lack of sport laws, the more lex sportiva prevails. It's not right in France, because the code of sport is very comprehensive and complete, so lex sportiva is less influenced. Secondly, sport organizations have dealt international agreements. For example, the International Committee have an agreement with the United Nations, and those agreements allow sport organizations to organize their own systems of rules, their own system of justice. And it has an impact of respect of human rights, because there's no external regulation. In fact, lex sportiva gives more importance to equity in sport because of doping, and it's a problem regarding to gender, and neutrality of sport, which is a problem versus freedom of speech of athletes, that is a fundamental right recognized by European Council and Universal Human Rights Declaration. So sports organizations, particularly the largest, FIFA, ICO, and so on, have a great influence in economic world. They have a lot of consideration for image. People love sports, and they are a great political influence. And we know that sport is a political and diplomatic matter, and we recognized. The United Nations, the Council of Europe recognize that sport is something important for peace, for inclusion, for health, for social cohesion. So it allows some specificity to sport actors and rules. Sports organization can form lobbies to influence political and juridical decisions that concern sports organizations and events also. Specificities of sports could be make them autonomous on certain decisions. For example, in France, federations are free to authorize or not authorize hijab in sport because of security considerations, for example. And it question necessarily the legitimacy of sport organizations, because they are challenged. They have to face theory of contrary injunctions developed by Gregory Bateson, because sports is recognized as a powerful social cohesion tool, also right for international relationships and diplomacy, because it is neutral. And in fact, to what extent human rights, especially freedom of speech, are compatible with this assertion. Likewise, sport is intended to assure equity and to fight against doping. To what extent freedom from discrimination can prevent discrimination for women we have who have testosterone rates elevate, or African athletes who have a PO rates very elevated too. And they are challenged also because economic models are challenged. To nuance the debate, certain demands are new. There is today more consideration for rights of minority, and we know that it is a question. It questions principle of universality of law and rules in all sectors, and especially in sport. Finally, we see that scandals impact on sport organizations. They impact their reputation and their legitimacy, because there is lack of external control, so they are not totally democratic, because there's no way of recours. And Marie-Cécile talked about endogamy, and sport is endogamy. There is a lot of whole athletes in governance of federations, and they govern for the new generation, and there is a real problem with that. And the problem is that they wash their dirty laundry as a family, and there's no separation of power, legislative, executive, justice. So there is a lack of transparency, a lack of democracy, and also a lack of innovation. But The good news is that pure players, new entrants in the ecosystem of sports, challenges organization and pushes them to react, because the particularities of pure players are user-centric and they are in tune with the moment. They practice trial and errors, so they can produce incremental innovation and can consider feedbacks. They are digital centric, so they have cheaper infrastructures, and this challenge sport organization. We know that outdoor sports, high rocks, CrossFit challenge traditional sport organization. And finally, sport organizations are challenged by companies that increasingly attentive to inclusion, respect of human rights, relatively to their CSR policy. And more and more companies practice responsible sponsoring. We can see that as a greenwashing effect, because they are more attentive to the virtue of their partners as for their own model, but these elements push the federations to be more virtuous regarding to governance and to human rights respect.
Thank you very much. Daniela. Go.
Yes, thank you. I think the recording started a bit later, so I just want to introduce myself again. I'm Daniela Heerdt, a researcher at the Asser Institute in The Hague, and one of the partners in the HERO project. And I know it wasn't planned; the discussion was supposed to move on, but I just wanted to briefly comment on what was said now by Charlotte, but also Marie-Cécile, because I think there's also a bit of another view you could take on this, in the sense that we do see some sport bodies turning towards, of course, good governance and human rights more. And that can also be interpreted as a way of strengthening their legitimacy again. And you mentioned the trust and the respect. So I think this kind of movement also helps sport bodies within all the challenges they're facing at the moment to try to claim back some of that legitimacy, some of the trust and the respect. Or if you want to use CSR, business and human rights terms, this social license to operate, right? So if you look at the values they stand for, you mentioned the values, discrimination, they say equality, respect. If we want to hold them accountable to these values, what does that mean for them? And I think, if it all comes down for me, for my work, to seeing how sport bodies are taking their human rights responsibilities serious. And what that means basically is that they understand where within their actions, decisions, rules, they have impacts on human rights, both positively and negatively, and then acting accordingly. And I think you can see this as part of good governance. You can see that as an additional layer to good governance. It doesn't really matter. I think we need to push both directions. But what matters more, I think, is that this doesn't become another ticking the box exercise, that we don't have another good governance checklist, a human rights checklist, a human rights scorecard, but that you actually find a way where these measures are meaningful, where you do see impact on those that have human rights, the rights holders, the athletes, but also all others that are participating in sports. And I think for those on the other side, also to understand that if you do this in a meaningful way, it does take time. So just, also managing expectations from different stakeholders. But I think, as you mentioned, also the sponsors, there's so many pressures coming now. And the fact that sports bodies are increasingly, at least some, I really don't want to talk about the majority, but some are reaching out to relevant stakeholders. I think that is at least a sign in a good direction. And I think an acknowledgement, like you say, of all the challenges they're facing. And I think, to my understanding, taking their human rights responsibilities serious can help to claim back some of the legitimacy. So just wanted to make that very brief intervention. Thanks,
Great.
Lukas.
Thank you. Would you like to add something, Silvia, maybe, or Pim, or Carole? feel free if you want to be a part of this discussion, for sure.
Yes, if I may.
Sure.
Sorry about I have an echo here. I get my phone. I just want to react to what Daniela said. Thank you very much, first of all, for this very nice discussion and for your interventions. I totally agree that currently in the international and national sports arenas, we have some initiatives, some reforms towards better forms of governance, integrity management, and human rights policies. I think the one issue is that the main international sports stakeholders, FIFA, IOC, and also UEFA in a lesser extent, I don't think they show the best examples in terms of democracy and transparency and human rights involvement. So I think it's a bit sad that the initiatives taken today are not from the main power horses of international sports. And I have a question to Daniela, since you reacted and I agree with you. And because you have a legal background, I would like to have your view on that. Considering the increasing competition from commercial bodies within international sports governance, and those commercial regulating bodies that try to open private circuits, private tournaments, they may be less concerned about human rights and democracy and governance since they are in a for-profit mindset. Do you think that this competition from those commercial bodies will push those international sports organizations towards public interest and legitimacy democracy, or to compete with those commercial bodies, the non-profit international sports governance organizations will also copy what they do and focus on commercial events and bypass human rights, legitimacy, democracy concerns. What is your view about how this international competition will push or not current international sports organizations towards the reform?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
yes, sure.
I will. I asked the moderator. I'm allowed to answer now. I think super interesting dynamics that you point out there, and haven't thought about it yet. I think my immediate reaction now that you bring this up is I have not a lot of kind of faith in the fact that this push will go so far that really the big ones are going to change their behaviors. I think because of, the links they established with international organizations, the license they are getting through these kind of relationships that they form, I do believe that they would want to try to still push their movement forward in the way they've already set it up in the past, 100 years or so. I think the other element that came to my mind immediately is that if you actually look at these kind of private initiatives, commercial initiatives on organizing sport competitions, new kind of leagues, new kind of sports, because I look at sport and human rights from this lens of business and human rights, I actually think the arguments, the expectations we can raise there are even stronger, because the business and human rights field, so basically, private entities and their impacts on human rights and what they are supposed to do when it comes to their human rights responsibilities, there is, lots of national movement to develop laws on regulating private companies and their human rights impact. So I think there's actually a way that perhaps we can, contain that even better than these transnational actors that we now have with FIFA or the IOC. You can't see them as a public actor in many ways. They are, of course, operating commercially, and there are like private elements to that. And I think this kind of hybrid form, that is what makes it so difficult to say, these human rights responsibilities apply to you. This is what you have to do, and this is how we can hold you to account. But if I think it is clearer that something is organized in a very private setting under a very specific jurisdiction, it might be easier to regulate that. It might be easier to say, because of these laws that are in place, you have to do human rights due diligence. you have to do a risk assessment whenever you organize an event. You have to make sure that you put measures in place. You have to make sure that you have a grievance mechanism in place in case you do harm human rights because of, the way you organize your sport, the way you organize your event. And again, this depends very much on where in the world these actors are operating. But just, my background and my approach to sport and human rights, my immediate reaction is perhaps there are even more possibilities to regulate that in a bit more straightforward way. Lots of my work is on trying to apply the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights to international sport bodies. As you might know, FIFA themselves have said, okay, let's ask the authors of these guidelines what that actually means for us. And I think I agree with you that the examples that are set are not the best, but we do see movement. And through that movement, certain practices are created that help us to, look at it. Are they good practices? Are they bad practices? What needs to be improved and what doesn't? And that helps to just move the entire debate, I think, forward and create experiences that we need. So yeah, I don't know if I really answered your question, but these are kind of my immediate reflections to what you mentioned.
It's very interesting. Thank you for your optimistic view.
Thank you.
You might not share it.
Do someone who would like to react to this discussion, like Carole, maybe, or no?
I would, but I will let Marie-Cécile continue if it's okay.
That's okay. No, I'm over.
Like, if you want, you can.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I will. Maybe I will try to develop it inside my presentation. So if it's okay for you.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Silvia, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to add to the discussion in terms of from athletes' perspective. It is very important, being myself an athlete, not an elite athlete, but still being in the field for many years, training and competing in certain sports. What we usually see, and my practical experience shows that athletes themselves they lack the basic understanding of their athletes' human rights. So whenever we are trying to push forward the agenda of human rights framework and we are trying to change certain policies at top level, I think at the same time, at parallel time, we should also invest a lot in educating and raising awareness among sports people. Because what we see is that in certain organizations, we might have the perfect policies on paper, but if athletes are not aware of their rights, if they don't know how to claim it, if they don't know how to challenge the status quo, then I think those perfect policies will just be at one level and they will never reach the final beneficiaries. So my reflection would be that have top to bottom approach, but also at the same time bottom to top, because we need to really empower athletes themselves with a basic understanding of what their rights are, how they can claim, and who can support them. There are so many that would like to know more and to be educated more on the topic, but they have a limited access to information. So having in mind this, perhaps we should also think about hosting and organizing events and activities that are targeting directly athletes and giving them these valuable resources and access to information that they desperately need.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the difficulty is that there is a great competitions between athletes, and if they are not top athletes, it is difficult for them to claim their human rights because they are replaced. So we need more external control in national rule, but also in international rule, because it's a specific world with a lot of endogamy and a lot of competition. People that are used to suffer, they are used to suffer, and they accept sometimes things that are unacceptable. And this is the experience of an athlete. So education is important. Education of athletes, education of managers, education of sport policy makers, and also independent justice to guarantee the application of human rights law.
And what if national or international rules become discriminatory?
They are.
No, but it is a real debate, because the debate is real not for sport only, and
it is the major tendency now.
The reality is how right of minorities question universality, and is intersectionality compatible with universal law? But I think it's difficult to answer it in few hours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to bring the word intersectionality, because actually it's exactly what I wanted to ask to Marie-Cécile right now. So, from your research and from your point of view, why is it important to adopt an intersectional approach to sport policies, considering multiple discriminations such as gender, social background, ethnicity, or sexual orientation?
It's very important from an epistemological and also a political point of view. And a quick reminder, because most decision makers still don't understand, or fail to understand, or don't want to understand what intersectionality is. It's not an exclusionary ideology. It is the contrary. It is a social science tool which precisely makes diagnosis to ensure that no one is excluded from access to resources. So it's an epistemological and also a political issue. And if we cross-reference issues of gender, class, and race, and many others, then we can include all the discrimination identified by European law, depending on the context. And I would like to add specifically that nationality is an essential one. We try to remove blind spots and put our finger on the discriminatory phenomena that reinforce each other or, on the contrary, neutralize each other. Intersectionality, so is a social science tool which aims at forgetting no one without categorizing people. On the contrary, it aims at making individuals and communities more included in society, in sports, but also other social spheres. Sometimes it seems that stigmatizing or excluding some categories of people is anecdotal. What you tolerate today, nevertheless, opens the door to much broader discrimination tomorrow. So sports helps to understand this, because probably of the separation of male and female competition, so it helps have a methodological approach. And it also helps to make things change from a political perspective. And if we move further, I would like to yes. If we move further, we can remind that since 1995, I mean the Beijing Declaration on Platform for Action in Favor of Women, sport has been mentioned in numerous political documents related to not only the rights of women and girls, but also the rights of people in general. And it has become a cross-cutting vector for SDG. It's not an SDG in itself, but it's a way to implement SDGs. It is known for its power to shape social norms and reach development outcomes that impact women's and girls' life daily, but also human rights daily. Because it's particularly concerned by intersectional approach from an epistemological perspective, it helps understand the world better, and it helps change the world better. Don't know if I answered your question, but
sure. Someone would like to react to this part? Oh, it's okay for you. Okay, great. So thank you very much for your insight. So now we are moving to the part 2. So we will much more talking about violence, abuse, and athletes protection. And I would like to start with you, Carole. According to your research, what are the main obstacles sports federations face in recognizing and addressing gender-based violence?
Thank you, Lukas. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today with you, even if it's online. It's also a great, it's always a great pleasure to be part of such event organized by Iris, of course, with a great team on the scene, but also behind the scene. Let me thank Antoine Diacre, Nathalie Monoro and her team, Gwenelle Sauzet and her team, and Pascal Boniface, of course. So I would like maybe to, in order to answer to your question, I would like to highlight maybe 4 key obstacles that sport federation face in recognizing and addressing gender-based violence. But first, let me perhaps point out the fact that in reality, the term gender-based violence is only rarely used by international sport federation in the world of sport. Based on my research, they definitely prefer the expression harassment and abuse, and more recently, safe sport and safeguarding, which is the exact topic of my thesis. So don't get me started on this. Otherwise, we will not finish the conference at time. But yeah, maybe before going on the 4 main obstacles, maybe let me first specify something about the fact that it's a really recent area of study. Gender-based violence in sport is relatively recent subject, while general violence has been studied through the work of Elias and Dunning. Obviously, gender-based violence remained a really blind spot for a very long time. It doesn't mean that there was no case. On the contrary, but they were not addressed publicly and often seen as an isolated incident. It's what we called bad apples myth, and such violence were frequently considered as a private matter, not something that concerned sport organization. So it really began to become a topic and a real topic of interest in the late 80s, thanks to the pioneering work of some researcher, Brackenbridge, Birkey, Fasting, Donnelly, for example. It was first focusing on sexual harassment and sexual abuse, and through the situation of the female athlete point of view towards a coach perpetrator, but it was developed at the time. Then the scope of research developed a little bit to had psychological violence, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and neglect. And so it was really important to have this comprehensive work in order to understand that it was not incident, but really a systemic violence that could be enabled, tolerated, and in some instance actively encouraged by a structure of sport. So yeah, when we think about these things, we may think about the really famous Larry Nassar case revealed in 2017. It was really significant, and especially because it exposed 2 dimensions that enable abuse. First, culturally and structurally. Culturally, because, for example, for the Larry Nassar case, the U.S. Gymnastics and the Michigan State University foster environment where reputation, sport success, and winning were prioritized over athlete safety. And structurally, because it's also highlight a broader issue in sport governance with the absence of adequate policies and practice to protect athletes. So I guess I will more develop this point on my second time for answering your question. So as I mentioned, I will explain 4 key obstacles. The issue of violence, abuse, and harassment have been put under carpet, minimized for decades for several reasons: silence, collusion, fear, ignorance and fear for the reputation of the organization. It's not me saying that, it's the IOC. In 2016, when they published a consensus statement, and after having worked and published during 10 years on this subject, so it's really important to see that even the IOC made put this word on paper, saying that it's really crucial. And it's perfectly illustrated by the Larry Nassar case. So, if I may, let me break down this element. First, about silence, and it's really interesting because since 1990, Sandra Kirby developed the concept of dome of silence in sport. It refers to a culture where athletes still at the very heart of the sport, but completely put aside, are encouraged to remain silent, to preserve the system. Such dome of silence exists to really keep athletes complacent in sport. And Kirby developed 7 imperatives: patriotism and nationalism, militarism, competition, media sport, work ethic, heterosexism or hypersexuality, and familialism, who detect the shape and strength of that dome of silence. So it was really interesting that since 2090, it was already put on paper, and the analysis were there. The silence operates in locker room, during tournament, and also increasingly online, and it's a very critical aspect for athletes, especially because you wake up with your mobile and you go to bed with your mobile. It rarely appears on camera, except with the Rubiales Hermoso case, but I will come back to this later. And it's a striking exception, and a very good example is the case of the Afghanistan women football team, where they were abused by the federation former president, Keramin Karim, who got sanctioned by FIFA, but also all several officials of the federation, in the context where speaking up mean for the athletes that they are risking their lives and the safety. The second point was about collusion, and I will try to develop 2 things. Collusion between individual and collusion of interest within the sport structure. Let me come back again to the Luis Rubiales cases. He was at the time president of the Spanish Football Federation. So he was judge. It was at the same time judge and involved in the case. So, for example, Borges Garcia wrote an article about this, saying that actually this case is super interesting, but it's not. It doesn't have to be to become a very. It's not the problem. It's more a symptom of a more broad governance failure, and it's exactly the title of his paper. And question of collusion, it could be also clash with values, with, for example, loyalty. It was mentioned on the roundtable before. Loyalty to coaches, coach mates, sport family. In French, we use the word laver son linge sale en famille, which is a settled conflict in private. But also it was also mentioned on this roundtable with the prevailing motto: no pain, no gain. That completely normalize suffering. Don't talk too much. Don't complain about the way you got treated. A second, after silence, after collusion, there was also a fear for reputation, and there is a very strong fear of scandal and a public backlash. And so here, organizations really worry about losing participants, seeing parents withdraw children from clubs. There is, of course, behind this fear of reputation, also financial concern, the loss of media, of partnership, the loss of sponsored or public funding. It was particularly the case with OK Canada, for instance. In May 2022, the organization lost 17 15 million of Canadian dollar in funding due to the withdrawal of a sponsor, but also a government. And the really interesting point with this example is after major sexual scandal, who rocked the organization, involving rape and sexual harassment and abuse of a young girl, they decided to publish an action plan. They decided to react to publish an action plan called "Shatter the Code of Silence and Eliminate Toxic Behavior in and around Canada Games." So for them, sexual harassment and abuse, rape, in other words, are toxic behavior. So it's also show how difficult for organization to just put a really clear word on things. And the last point I would like to highlight is also ignorance. And here, based on my research, it's quite nuanced. Some federations still don't know how to deal with this issue, even though that try often lack the expertise, infrastructure to respond effectively. Some federations really deny the existence of the problem. It doesn't happen in our sport. We don't want to get involved in this, because if we are involved, that means that we have a problem and we have to face the problem. And others try to get into the problem, but sometimes they worsen the situation through procedural mistake, re-traumatization. They don't know when they do not adopt a traumas approach center. So it's really complicated. And so they also lack resources, training, and means. So for instance, in my research based on International Sport Federation, safeguarding is an add-on to role like integrity or governance. So one person has a safeguarding officer, could be also the integrity officer, but also the governance officer in this. So, and the last case, some federations know that they don't have the time, the capacity to develop it. So they say, okay, so we are not able to do it. We will have a plan in order to develop such policy in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And in the meantime, please refer to what IOC is doing. Please refer to what this organization is doing. So that's obviously it's not a perfect answer, but at least they are giving some tools to athletes or to people who want to develop on this. And it will be really important to see if they check the milestone develop. So just to wrap it up and to give the speak to the audience. In short, the obstacle are both cultural but also structural. It's really important to have this in mind. Violence continued to be silenced by tradition, complicated by conflict of interest, but also exacerbated by inexperience. They don't know how to deal with this. But in my opinion, recognizing this barrier is a very first step in overcoming them. So obviously, some federation, also sports organization, are doing a ticking the box, but some of them are really trying to do progress. But there is a real work and a lot of work to do to go for a real shift in governance, accountability, but also mindset. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Carole. That was very interesting. Someone would like to react to this intervention? Oh, no, it's okay. Silvija?
Very, very shortly. Carole, I cannot agree more with you. Everything that you have said echoes with my experience on the ground. I think that sports sector in general is so behind this topic of gender-based violence. And just as you said, even putting a word on that, it barely exists. So the preferred word is, as you said, safeguarding, safe sport. And for me, in practice, since I come from a very vibrant and dynamic non-governmental sector, where there are many organizations outside of the field of sport that are working and have expertise in gender-based violence, trying to collaborate with them and trying to collaborate with sport organizations and ecosystem on the other side, it's even difficult sometimes to find a common language. So sometimes we even fight over whether we should call it workshop on safeguarding or a workshop as it should be on preventing gender-based violence, because we're exactly going to talk about all the forms of gender-based violence. So I completely agree what you have said, and it goes down at the ground level. It's basically the same, and we do need to be more vocal, I think, about using the right term and doing this shift culturally as much as we can.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes.
Yeah, Marie-Cécile.
Thank you, Carole. It's very interesting, and it's for me very hard to hear. But I know that you talk about facts, of course. It's very hard to hear that some organizations still don't know how to deal with violence. It's incredible that in 2025 we still face this situation, because there are many tools, so many tools to fight it, not only in the field of sport, but also elsewhere. Let me talk briefly about an example that I know quite well. It is the 2016 law in France in the educational field, which gives not only legal and legislative tools to fight against sexual violence against children in schools, but it gives also very practical tools to find people who previously were sexual predators, and to control their backgrounds and their professional course and so on. So tools exist. It's a matter of being volunteer,
leadership.
Really want to do it, and not only say, okay, we don't know how to deal with that because we don't want to harm anybody, we don't want to put ourselves in question. We don't want to make some noise. It's impossible, and it's not understandable. It's not listenable, if I could use this word today. And the social demand, it's so big, notably in young generations, that it cannot last any longer. So I know it's the case, but I know you're right. But it's really incredible to hear that.
If I just make, no, Charlotte, you wanted to say something?
Maybe just some three things to support your concepts. Firstly, it's difficult to take word on sexual abuses in sport, because for minors especially, there is expectations of family about performance, so they don't talk about what they are living. Considering the sports organization and federation, they don't know how to deal. That's a problem, because there is benevolence, and it's more difficult to deal with benevolence and to control them. That's to deal with professional that you can licenciate.
Fire.
So, and there is a lack of means of human resources to do the job. And to ensure that the job is done.
Yeah, as you point out something really important, but I guess I will develop it a little bit later. But maybe to answer to what Marie-Cécile said, I completely agree. It's still quite shocking that organizations do not understand properly what is sexual harassment, sexual abuse, physical violence, etc., etc. But for the reason that I developed, it's still the case. But it's I will join Daniela in an optimistic view, saying that. In my research, I did something like an overview on 40 international sports federations, trying to understand when and why they developed some safeguarding frameworks. And so at the very beginning, for example, before 2015, none of them have developed anything on safeguarding on sexual harassment and abuse. And then it really is really becoming a new thing. And as I mentioned, I really point out the Larry Nassar case, and Pim can definitely develop a lot about this later on or during his point. But Larry Nassar case really is often considered as it was a case for the doping agenda, the Festina. It was the same. It has the same echo than the Festina scandal had in 1999 in France. So it really put organization the need to change something, to develop new things. Obviously, for social dimension, for showing that they are doing something. For in sociology, we'll say they will perform their action, but it's also sometimes they really are involved and they develop, and some of them are really they really want to go deeper and to go faster on this field. But I guess I will develop it later. But there is still huge amount of progress to do, but there was a very important steps developed a few years ago. But as Marie-Cécile mentioned, regarding geopolitics now, regarding international norms, regarding fundings for things, and regarding feminist work, it could also have some backlash somehow. So we have to be very vigilant and very careful about this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Carole. I think I will give the floor now to Pim Verschuuren. According to your research, Pim, what prevents people within sport institutions from speaking out, about abuse and violences? And it is mainly, from your point of view, structural issues, fear of consequences, or is silence something normalized in the sports world?
Thank you very much. I'm cutting the sound on my phone, not to have the echo. I'm very honored to participate to this great discussion. We touch upon so many nice subjects. We don't have time in even one day to cover everything, especially with such great panelists. So I'm very honored for the invitation. Thank you very much. And also congratulations for your EU project, which sounds very interesting. I'm eager to see the final results. So I will stay vigilant about your publications. Thank you again. Well, I agree also with Silvija that Carole summed up everything in a few minutes. So it's difficult for me to speak after Carole. But I will try to be very synthetic because many subjects have already covered in the last minutes. So I would like to start at saying that it's always difficult to blow the whistle, to speak out against someone on any type of wrongdoing, whether you are in a company, in a school, public administration. It's never well seen to denounce your brother, your colleague, your boss, your neighbor. Sometimes we hear that, well, in some countries, some cultures, it's well seen to denounce someone. But it's not true. It's never well seen. So it's always difficult. When you give up an information about some kind of cheating or fraud, you are always vulnerable to the reactions, and you never can anticipate the reactions, especially in our erratic, uncertain world, and especially with the online activity right now, the social media. You never know what will happen once you start to speak. So there is no more vulnerable and exposed person than a whistleblower on any subject. But still on this issue of violence and abuse and the sport context, I think there are two specificities. The first one is the subject of violence and abuse. It's difficult to denounce fraud and conflicts of interest in a company But speaking out about violence and abuse, especially if you suffered from it personally, nothing can be more difficult than that, because you expose, you publicize the most intimate, private feelings that you may have encountered, or someone you don't know but you have witnessed something, or you suspect something. Again, stakeholders within sports and outside sports, politicians, media, journalists may instrumentalize your information. So you cannot be more exposed, especially if you publicize very intimate issues. It's also difficult for your entourage. Imagine that your family, your entourage will know that you have been abused, raped, publicly in front of everybody. And because such cases are sensitive and very sometimes political, and that's why it's also difficult for sports organizations to deal with them, because it's so sensitive and political. So that's why they are unwilling and unable to address them, as Carole has said, and you have said, many panelists, because it's violence and abuse cases today are very sensitive. We see it in France now in the politician sector. The second specificity is the sporting context. Carole has already mentioned that. Violence and abuse are often normalized. It's the norm for elite athletes. Silvija, you mentioned that, and Charlotte as well, to suffer, to train yourself, the high performance norms, as in participate to normalize forms of harassment, violence, and abuse. And that's why it becomes more difficult to denounce such acts. Also, you have mentioned that as well, athletes are in a precarious situation. Sometimes they have no contract, or they have very short-term contract. They are in a difficult physical and psychological situation. They have to train every day, to be every weekend competitive. Otherwise, they will be not selected. They will lose their contract. All this athlete-specific situation is not prone to whistleblowing. Again, you have mentioned that as well. Athletes are conditioned from their very young age to focus on their performance, to follow the orders of the captain, of the coach, of the club president. They are told at what time to go to bed, how to talk to the media, what to eat. So imagine confronting yourself with an ethical situation such as whistleblowing, because it's always an ethical situation to blow the whistle. Well, they're not trained for that. And Silvija and Charlotte, you mentioned that. They don't have ethical education, ethical training. So that's why, again, it's very difficult. And their career is so fragile. Their selection in the team, their appraisal from the local fans is their lifeguard. They have devoted all their life to their career. So anything that can put their career at risk, they are trained to avoid that. So again, whistleblowing is not very likely in such situations. Carole has also mentioned the fact that today we have very few protection mechanisms within sports and outside of sports for whistleblowers. The public whistleblower protection schemes right now in the EU are not well adapted to sports because often athletes don't have a direct link with an organization. So again, athletes are the most vulnerable and weak and unassisted population when it comes to denouncing violence and abuse. Also, I would like to finish by the fact that I think you have mentioned that already. There's a specificity about sports that sport authorities and also the larger societies that are dealing with sports accept the exceptional conditions of sports. We see it in sports law. We see it in the Olympic Games. We accept things in sports management, in sports governance, and in the practice of sports that we will never accept elsewhere. And sports authorities have internalized that. That's why the sports organizations are so non-transparent, that basic aspects of human rights and democracy are sometimes not respected. And that's why athletes as well have normalized this exception. And they have normalized the fact that you cannot and you don't, you shouldn't disturb this situation. And anything that you can do, say, or act upon that may create scandals, that may create problems within sports, that may touch upon the financial and political interest of sports today, the national geopolitical interest as well within sports, everything will be retaliated upon. So that's why you don't denounce violence and abuse and any wrongdoing, integrity wrongdoing within sports. So again, there's many variables, individual, contextual, situational variables that are against whistleblowing in sports, especially in violence and abuse. But I mean, the general norm within sports is that you stay silent on anything because there's so much interest at stake. And I think it's a paradox of modern sports. It's the most exposed universal activity. We have seen it last summer in France with the Olympic Games, but it's the sector where we have the most opacity and the most difficulty sometimes to address very concrete integrity issues such as abuse and safeguarding. So I'm sorry I've been very fast, but we may address such subjects later on in the discussion.
No, that was perfect. Thank you very much, Pim. Thank you. Someone would like to react to what he said? Okay. So, Daniela, I will try to call from your optimistic point of view, because as we have seen, it's pretty tough today. So how does international law currently protect athletes against abuse and violations? Do you have any insight to give us?
Yeah, and I think, Pim, I will react to some of the things that you said. And I'm not sure I will continue my optimistic streak, but let's see. I want to give a few elements to this question, or a few elements to my answer. The first one, I think, is to stress again, athletes are human beings first and athletes second. That automatically means that human rights apply to them. They enjoy human rights just like any of us. They are protected by human rights and also in the sporting context. But as Pim just said, they somehow have this kind of special thing around them because of the specificity of sport, because of, these kind of exceptions that were created over the years. And I think that is what we need to kind of go against. And here I also pick up on Marie-Cécile saying the narrative matters. I think, again, we have to say it again and again. Athletes are human beings. Athletes enjoy human rights. And that's the key message we need to spread and thereby change the norm of silencing them, the norm of, but they are winning the Olympics, so that's what you have to go through. No, that is of course not okay. And that's, what the Hero Project is all about, right? That's what we're trying to do with the project. That's why we have events like the one we have today. And then to the question on how international law can protect human rights of athletes. So I think many of us here will know international law obviously puts obligations on states, on governments primarily, right? So governments are the primary duty bearers under international law, under international human rights law, to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights. That does include an obligation to also prevent third parties from abusing human rights. And third parties can be businesses, can, I think, also be sport bodies, of course. So I think, the kind of most straightforward answer to that would be that states actually are under the obligation to regulate in a way that also sports bodies do not harm human rights of athletes and others. The problem is we have created this autonomy of sport, we have accepted that this was created, and states are very reluctant to intervene for the majority of time. And it is mind-blowing to me as well that things we have created in other sectors, like the education sector, how is it possible that this hasn't happened in the sports sector, right? So I find that always very mind-blowing. And I think lots of work to be done for intergovernmental organizations to counter that. The problem is also, and I mentioned it before, intergovernmental organizations still have special agreements with some of these sports bodies in place. And actually, we have policy papers, policy documents, literally saying sports is special. We accept the specificity of sport. And I think that is really, when it comes to the harm that sports can cause, we need to change the narrative. I'm pretty sure that there are many ways where sport is special, where sport is specific, and where we maybe should accept the, internal judicial systems they built to deal with sports disputes only. But there are so many disputes that go way beyond that, and we need to really target that. I think the not more important, but the other important question to ask is actually how sports law, Lex Sportiva, can protect athletes' human rights. And here, I think it doesn't. That's the answer at the moment, or very, very little in those sports environments where we now have safeguarding policies, where we maybe have a human rights policy, where the awareness and the experiences have developed a little bit. But that is really the minority of the sports bodies looking at that. And just if you develop that further, why are you asking this question? Of course, also because we need to think about accountability. How can we hold them accountable? And I think at the moment it is super difficult to hold these sports bodies accountable. In my work and my research, there's lots of attention being paid to cases at the moment pending at the European Court of Human Rights, in particular the Castor Semenya case. And I understand it, and I think it is a super important case. It can have quite an implication. We had a judgment already. Now it's pending before the Grand Chamber. And I think the judgment should come in the next couple of weeks or months. But for me, it is also important that we remember the actor held responsible there is not World Athletics. It's actually Switzerland. And so it's quite a detour to accountability, I think, right? So yes, we're holding Switzerland accountable for the way they are regulating the bodies, that are related to sports in Switzerland. In this case, actually, the Swiss Federal Tribunal and the Court of Arbitration for Sport. But it is still a detour. And then the question is, when we have the judgment, what will Switzerland do with that? How will they start regulating sports bodies more? And what is the effect of that? Will sports bodies start leaving Switzerland and just move to another place? And what do we do then? So I think, yes, we do see a trend of sports bodies understanding perhaps a bit more how their decisions, how their rules can be challenged. And I'm not only talking about human rights regimes, but also the European Court of Justice, right? So competition law, for instance, being another avenue. But I don't think it's enough. So I hope I now left the optimistic category a bit with that answer.
A little bit.
And not on purpose, but I think just to raise a bit of caution. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'll stop here. Thanks.
So someone would like to react to what?
Yes, please. We have a great question in the chat from Friedrich Reinertz that may follow up your intervention, Daniela. Thank you. It's about organizations like FIFA that have published some policies regarding human rights. Do you think that now they may go against such policies, that we could file complaints against FIFA? Is there a way, a route to attack such organizations through the fact that they go against their own engagement?
Yeah, can I answer?
Please.
Yeah, so that is, I think, a very interesting question, and one we have not yet seen the answer to. And I think I want to add to the example that Frederic mentioned. Thanks for the question, by the way, Frederic. So yes, we have human rights policies, but for instance, what we also have since a few years is human rights criteria in bidding and hosting regulations for Olympic Games, Paralympic Games, but also the FIFA World Cups, the Euro as well, Commonwealth Games. So it's these kind of expectations toward event organizers to look at human rights the way they organize and stage the event. And these are contracts, right? So these human rights requirements turn into contractual obligations, actually. And in the same contracts, you find arbitration clauses and reference to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So for me, what is very ironic here is that actually what it means, and I'm not an expert on contract law, but I think what it means when I read this correctly is that if you want to challenge a party to that contract for failing their obligations, let's say under the human rights obligations, you would have to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Obviously, the next question is then, are they equipped to actually deal with these kind of cases? Actually, there's lots of research done by my colleague Antoine Duval and also others showing how much the Court of Arbitration for Sport already deals with human rights cases, with human rights issues, lots of them related to Article 6. Sorry, Frederica, I'll get to your FIFA human rights policy example in a bit. Just what I want to add to this is the other thing that I find quite ironic here is that these kind of rules or criteria that are put into these contracts, you would think they are there to benefit the rights holders, right? To protect, for instance, local populations that are being affected by the organization of such an event, to protect the workers that are helping. They have no standing. They cannot challenge the parties to the contract because they didn't sign the contract. So it's quite, for me, what have they done? Is it just, window dressing? Oh, this is an easy thing to do. Let's put it in the contract. So then we say, look, we're doing something on human rights. I hope not. And I hope there's a follow-up to that to fix this. But I think there's really a gap that this leaves. Now, when FIFA, for instance, has a human rights policy or other sport bodies have human rights policies, to me, this becomes actually part of Lex Sportiva or the rules that should be applied in cases at the Court of Arbitration for Sport, maybe, or in their internal dispute settlement mechanisms, ethics committee, disciplinary committees. It hasn't been done yet, because also you're not challenging FIFA in these committees, or so I think it is. The question really is who has standing and who can challenge FIFA in what kind of forum based on these commitments that they not voluntarily that they made. And I'm saying not voluntarily because I think the reality also still is that there has to be a crisis before change happens. And that was, I think, the clear example with FIFA. They went through this huge reputational crisis coming from the corruption scandals and all of that, which kicked off most of their human rights work. What I think might give a good kind of opportunity to test these self-made commitments is really the developments we now see leading towards Saudi 2034. How do these commitments fit with awarding Saudi Arabia the World Cup? How can they make that fit? But then again, the question is, which forum can you use? And in the past, things like the national contact points from the OECD have been used. I would argue with some success because I like to be optimistic. Maybe that is another place that you can use and where you also obviously would bring this fact that they have a human rights policy into play. So yeah, I'll stop here. I hope, Frederica, this answered your question a bit.
Thank you very much. Someone would like to react again? Online? No? Pim? Perfect. Okay, so I will turn myself to Carole Gomez because the time is flying actually. Carole, how could current governance models better include preventive measures against sexual and gender-based violence, according to your studies?
Thank you for the question, the massive question. So in 3 minutes, I will try to summarize it. But let me first saying that if we want to better prevent violence in sport, current governance model definitely need to be strengthened on very multiple level. But in my opinion, and Silvija pointed out, we also have to put to remind that athletes are at the very center of the reflection. They are always aside, so it's real crucial to put them in the center of the reflection. They are just not the merchandise, but they are the most the individual most at the risk, and they are also crucial stakeholders whose voice must shape the model. And as Pim said, they are the most vulnerable and not guide in this path. So if I may try to develop, it's not a magic stick that I have. It's just some recommendation and some ideas, obviously developed by already developed by the literature. But in my opinion, there is 4 major steps that are essential to not achieving it, but to paving the way to go it. First, it might sound symbolic, but it's really recognizing the importance of the issue. Obviously, it's symbolic. Obviously, it's just it could be just a way to say that, but it's absolutely fundamental. Recognizing the importance of this issue at the highest level of the governance is crucial. This recognition will come with, as I said, structural commitment, but also a cultural shift. That means that everybody in federation, clubs, in the world of sport need to be aware about what is safeguarding, what is the risk, who could be the perpetrator, how we deal with this. Because if they don't, they could cause additional harm by creating false expectation, re-traumatization, as I mentioned. Second step will be to build knowledge and understanding. And on this part, it's really interesting to see how federation do or do not trainings and education on this one. But I will point out what Charlotte said before about it will concern absolutely everyone, not just coaches, not just athletes, but also board member, president, but also volunteers and coach. And for example, we saw that during the last Olympics and Paralympics, where volunteers were involved in such trainings. It's really crucial to guide them, to explain to them what constitutes gender-based violence and what is it correctly. In corruption, Thierry Minissier said that we don't have a proper definition, but we know approximately what it is. It is exactly the same with gender-based violence. We may know what it is, but more precisely, it's really complicated to properly explain it and define it without the aid of some tools. So it's really important to give them the definition, the understand the sign, how to react, but also regarding the legal background. For example, in some cases, some behavior could be a disciplinary case, and in other, it could be a legal case, it could be a criminal case in another. So it's also a complexity that we have to put on the front line. And it's really important. It's a kind of learning that creates national. It's essential to create a safe environment, but also responding effectively when concern arrives. The third point will be to establish adequate structure and resources. And this is also crucial, as I mentioned before. I will not repeat myself, but it's really important to have human, financial, and time resources. This is not a side task. It requires long-term investment. It must be treated as a political priority. As Marie-Cécile said, it also requests a very strong leadership on the organization to do that. So it's really important. But also here we can see based on my research, we can see different strategy developed by a federation. Some are considering safeguarding within the integrity department, the legal department. Others are developing an independent entity. For example, gymnastic developed it. The Gymnastic Ethics Foundation developed its own organization in order to address such idea. It could be a solution. Once again, it's not. We have to go deeper in the understanding, in the means, in the human resources and the time that they are considering, but it's important. And also it was mentioned by a report developed by Ingrid Bettler a few years ago about creating a new agency, a new organization focusing on safeguarding, like the WADA for anti-doping. It could have a quite interesting point of view to develop a proper organization regarding safeguarding in sport. Obviously, there is pro and con. There is, I'm not sure the timeline and the current state of geopolitics could be the best time for doing this regarding some, let's say, tension. But it could be interesting to keep this in mind. And it's really important things. And there is also, and my fourth point will definitely align with what Marie-Cécile said about there is a lot of tools developed by federation, by organization, and it's super important to have to take a comprehensive step by step. I will give you two examples. The first one was developed in 2015. It calls the International Safeguard for Children. So obviously it's dedicated to children, but definitely it's a complete it's a comprehensive approach, and it has 8 steps: developing a safeguarding policy, establish procedure, seek external support when needed, minimize risk, and as Daniela mentioned, it's also risk management for federation or for organization to take into account such thing. It's published guidelines for everyone involved in order to understand what is going on and what will be the next step, to recruit, train, and communicate consistently, work in partnership with national authorities, and obviously the very last point, which is crucial, is also monitor and evaluate regularly to ensure that the improvements are made and to have an accountability. And let me also give you another example. For example, I mentioned several times the IOC and the role that it has taken since a few years now. He developed several tools, for example, a toolkit for NOCs, but also for international federation, linked to safeguarding. Obviously, it's not complete, but it's always a good start. They also developed some webinars. They developed a safe sport unit. They developed online tools, and we saw during the last Olympics and Paralympics in Paris that it was quite interesting to have this tool in place. So just to summarize, embedding preventing measure into governance is not a box ticking exercise, and it could be a risk, but it's a long-term, multi-layered process, and so it definitely requires, as Marie-Cécile said, leadership, but also willingness to share power with those who are impacted. And I will stop my presentation now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carole. Someone would like to react?
Yes.
If I may, in 1 minute.
Oh, in 1 minute. Okay.
If it's possible.
We could say that it is key to make sport accountable for what it does to laws, but what if the law changes and become discriminatory? It's not an utopia, it's real now. Yeah. That's the reality. So I guess that as you mentioned, somehow Europe has a major role to play as a regulatory instance, because Europe has long done done much to understand how far sport is not in the sidelines of society but within society. Second leverage, finance research, like your project, of course, finance research project, leave room for activism, make noise, spread the narrative. It's very, very important because the geopolitical narratives that spread the misinformation, disinformation about human rights are very, very strong. So we have to work on this issue. And third one, as you mentioned, Carole, the third one is key also. Fight against endogamy in sport, which is very possible, notably in some countries in Europe, by very simple leverage, such as limiting mandates over time in federations. Because when you have endogamy, you don't put yourself in question. You say, okay, things are okay. I don't want to change. I don't want to bother things. And it's a key point that is only accepted in sport. Nowhere else you have such dynamics that it's still ongoing. Thank you. 1 minute and a half. Sorry.
Maybe 3. Thank you very much. No, thank you very much for your highlight, we'll say. So I think we're gonna move to the third part, if it's okay with you, since we have only 15 minutes left, which is not a lot. So I will ask to my dear colleagues to make it short, if it's possible, something like 4 minutes each. That would be really perfect. So we're gonna move about to part 3, much more about transparency, ethics, and responsibility. And Charlotte, I would like to ask you this question: can the digital strategies of sports federation help create more transparent governance that respects human rights, or do they sometimes prevent it?
So it's a good question, because digital models are challenging the federation for 2 reasons. Firstly, the model is a challenge, and we can consider the 5 quarter forces to explain that. Customers changes, there is new entrants. We have seen it in the last intervention. There are substitutes for sport practice, like cultural activity, outdoor sports, and suppliers changes also. Athletes can now express themselves with social networks, and it facilitates the expression of athletes. Secondly, if the sport is neutral, today athletes are challenged, and the federation clubs ask them to be engaged for a cause, for political causes. Sometimes I can example this. Racism is a cause. Is a such cause, and in the same way, athletes are attended to be neutral, and today athletes want to express themselves. Sponsors expect that athletes are engaged for causes, environmental, social, education causes, and lines are moving, and federations are challenged by this fact, and they have to react sometimes to expression of athletes online. This is easier to express something online than to express something in the media, because sport medias are also endogame, and by the past, you can imagine that it was easy for board members of a federation, for example, to manage their reputation, managing their journalist network, for example. Today, this is not true, and federations and sport organizations have to be vigilant about bad buzz, but because it could happen quickly. It could happen very quickly, because particularly we know that bad feelings, bad emotion are a powerful driver of action. and people share this information massively. So the problems take scales, massive scales, and it can be a real problem for federation because stakeholders are interested sometimes to instrumentalize the cause, and bad buzz increase with it. For example, I don't know if you have seen the excellent series of Fever that shows how political movements, but also competitors of enemies of structures could instrumentalize the debates and challenge reputations of sport federation, of club, and for federations. Reputation, management of reputation is now a highly strategic competence because there is new stakeholders, and these new stakeholders are platforms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Without any transition, I will move to Pim right now, if you can make it short, of course. So, Pim, I wanted to ask you this question due to your research. To what extent can athletes' eco-activism be considered whistleblowing, and what ethical and professional challenges do they face when they publicly denouncing harmful environmental practices?
Thank you, Lukas. I had a problem of connection, so I don't have the sound anymore, but I guess it's my turn now. I will be very quick, because I know that the time is precious right now. Yes, I'm dealing right now in a research program on the eco-activism of athletes, especially in the ultra trail running environment. And I see many connections with the whistleblowing subjects, because eco-activist athletes are actually stepping up to raise problems of public interest. And they are also opposing strong private interest. So it's a counter-hegemonic behavior. And so we see many similarities with the whistleblowing issues. Also, the fight against climate change is a political problem. It's a political subject. It's a polarizing debate. So it's very difficult for athletes to assume and carry such weight and engage into such a difficult and sensitive issue. So the specificities that we see in our result is that very often athletes, they think that they don't have enough knowledge and competencies on environmental issues, because it's a technical, sometimes problem, the carbon footprint of events of an organization or an athlete. So they lack knowledge and competencies on such issues. So it's difficult for them to engage publicly. They also fear the hypocrisy trap, meaning that very often, if they engage into activism, eco-activism, they will be attacked by saying that you participated to the Olympic Games, you have a very high carbon footprint, so you shouldn't engage yourself into such public debates. So you have a strong online harassment dimension with this issue. So it's very difficult for athletes to combine a professional career and an eco-activist public profile. So that's why we have very few eco-activist athletes, although many of them live in very strong dissonances. They don't like the fact that they are polluting and that their sports is polluting the planet, but it's difficult for them to engage and defend another model. So I would just conclude by saying that for organizations, allowing athletes to engage in such issues and debates is not only a matter of putting athletes at the center of sports governance, but it's also an accountability mechanism. By allowing athletes to blow the whistle or to talk about climate change issues, it's a way to raise problems that you are, as an organization, responsible for. So it's a very strong, I think, democratic mechanism. I'll conclude with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, Daniela, you will have the heavy weight to conclude this great discussion. So, I have the last question for you. What does the reluctance of sports institutions to address human rights issues reveal about their institutional culture?
Okay. Yes. I will be brief and also try to wrap up a bit our discussion, or at least come back to a point that I think was a bit of the red thread throughout our discussion today. I think you could say a lot. You can also say maybe not so much. And then you get into this debate of, is it ignorance and reluctance? Is it not knowing any better? And I think we've heard enough today prove that it's hard to hide still behind saying, we don't know what we have to do. So I think, that is kind of, we can be clear on that. I still believe that reluctance might not be the right word. Why I'm saying that is because I think in many ways, and this is again now specifically to human rights and my work in this space, in many ways, sports bodies are actually doing a lot of things on human rights issues without using the label human rights. And then I'm talking about safe sport, for instance. I'm talking about work on diversity and inclusion. I'm talking about sustainability work, for instance. And obviously, this is a question I've asked myself a lot. Does it help? Is it needed to use the human rights label? What does it add? And to, again, come back to the narrative, because I do think that was a bit the red thread and kind of really the purpose of today and bringing us here and trying to push the narrative forward. Of course, my answer is yes, it does help and it is needed. And I think it is needed because of what you said in the very beginning, Marie-Cécile, around making sure you also look at the blind spots, making sure you eliminate the blind spots. So for me, using the human rights label, using a human rights-based approach to looking at how we can protect athletes' rights, make sure that you don't miss anything. Make sure that you actually look at all the risks. It makes sure that you look at all the stakeholders that could potentially be impacted. And it also helps you to make sure that you look at all the range of measures that perhaps are, available for you to react to these issues. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. That's perfect, actually.
Yeah. Okay, great.
We have 1 minute left, so I will just conclude very briefly. I just want, first of all, to thank you all, the participants, of course. I was very honored, actually, to speak with you today. It was very interesting, and I'm sure that it will be interesting for the audience too. I would like to thank also the audience, of course. Sorry about the questions. Unfortunately, we won't have enough time to answer to everything, but I hope you had a lot of other answers. Of course, I'm sure about that. And of course, last but not least, I would like to thank you, the IRIS team, for sure. Special mention with Elias Gassem, Fatouba, and Nathalie Moreau. And of course, thank you, my dear colleague of the HERO project. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.